Hey everybody, welcome to my channel. I'm Fantasia and this is Sewing with Tay. Today I want to do a video on my embroidery machine. I made this large scale applique sweatshirt. The mama sweatshirts have been going kind of popular right now, and I told y'all before on my last video I didn't want to do that because I felt like it was lame. So I did my dukes and I think it went really well. But the caveat there was I paid someone to digitize it for me. I have my own embroidery software program called Embroidery Artistic Digitizer that I am still learning how to use, and for the amount of money I paid for it, I am trying to learn how to use it so that I can eventually be able to get my money's worth digitizing for other people and digitizing for myself. So I wanted to do a sweatshirt for my brand, the Aya Emporium, and I wanted it to be big. But as you guys know, I have a brother persona PRS100. The biggest frame size is an 8x8, and you can't do this on an 8x8. So I was like, one, I'm going to digitize my own file. So I did watch a couple tutorials, and it actually was pretty easy to do an applique file with just basic block letters. And then I wanted to get more practice of like lining up, like framing multiple frames and getting them to be lined up and level. So those were my goals for this little project, and I wanted a sweatshirt to match my little Nike Jordan 1s. That's this like maroon color, so I'm like double whammy. So we're gonna get right into it. Again, I'm using Embroidery Artistic Digitizer. I have a brother persona PRS100 single needle, single arm embroidery machine, and I think that's it. Any tools or anything that I use, like the backing for my embroidery, I will put in the comments. Although, as you will see in the video, I used this like t-shirt cutaway backing, like mesh, when I was trying to embroider t-shirts, which did not go well. We had to do another video on that, but it did not go well. But I still had it, so I was like, I'm gonna try to use it for this. And I used it for the Madukes one, and it worked. And you don't have that like hard stiff, you know how sometimes you get embroidery shirts and they be real hard. Well, it's fine. So I'm like, I'm gonna use this again instead of buying regular cutaway until I actually feel like I need to buy regular cutaway stabilizer. So we're gonna get right into me giving you a quick, it is not a tutorial, just showing you how I did it. Quick to like sew along, work along of me creating my applique file and then getting this on the machine and getting it lined up and all of that jazz. So let's get into the video. I have Embroidery Artistic Digitizer, so that's the program that I'm going to use to attempt to make my own applique file. I saw some videos on YouTube, so I'm just going to go through those steps really quickly. I hid under the properties to cut style, but I don't think I need that because I don't have a cutter. I used the text button to type in the words Aya, and then once I got those letters typed out, I went over and hit applique, and then I hit cut after zigzag. I did miss a step here, and that was adding the satin stitch along the outline, which you'll see I had to go back later and do. I actually wanted these letters to be pretty big, and I switched my hoop, as you can see, to an 8x8 frame. So I'm like, if I can get each letter in one frame, we're going to see how it goes. So I had to make a second frame for the next letter. So you'll see me making the next frame for the Y. It hit me halfway through that I don't have to do the A twice. So once I do it once, then I can just use that same file again for the second A. So I'm just playing around with the size. In hindsight, I'm doing this voiceover after the video is done, and I realized I use an 8x8 hoop, but I'm actually using my mighty hoop, which is like 7 1/4 or something to that effect. So I ended up having to adjust the size on the machine once I got ready to stitch. But let's go ahead and prep the shirt. I have mighty hoops, that's what I intend on using, and I do have a hoopster where you can put the shirt on, but I find it sometimes easier just to hoop it flat on the table. So what you see me doing here was finding the center and finding how low I want it to be below the neck edge. Since the biggest frame that my machine can do is an 8x8, I want to try my best to figure out how to line these up. It is kind of difficult. So what I decided to do is I measured about 4 inches down from the neck edge to decide how far I want it to be. I lined it up the top of the shirt, like at the neckline, on a line on my mat, and then I measured down to the same distance so that I can kind of draw a straight line. Now, this isn't like science, but it was kind of close enough. And then I looked at how big my applique was going to be. It was about 7 inches. So then I drew another line from the first line. That was the height of my applique. And then I drew a straight line. So you'll see me again, I'm lining my sweatshirt up with the line on my cutting mat. And I'm going to measure from that line so I can make sure that it is level. And you see one side was a little bit off, so I went back and made a new line so I could try to get that line as straight as possible. It still looks a little bit off, but we're going to see how it goes. So to try to get my placement accurate, I went ahead and printed out my embroidery file so that I could place it on my sweatshirt so that I could see where I would expect it to start and stop. And then I use this to lay it out to then mark it so that when my embroidery machine goes to trace, I can follow the red dot on the machine to see where the stitches are going to land once it decides to start stitching. So this wasn't foolproof. Like I did have issues with getting the placement, especially with the white. So if y'all know of any other like techniques to help you get a better placement, please let me know because I'm just figuring this out based on what I've seen online. So once I kind of got my fabric prepped, I went to my machine to save them so that I can put them on the embroidery machine. My artistic digitizer software will automatically save as a draw file, and then that's an editable file for your embroidery. But my machine, I need a PES file or DST file, so I'm saving them as a draw file on my computer, then turning around and saving them as a PES file on my USB drive so that I can take said USB and then put it into the embroidery machine so that I can embroider on my sweatshirt. So this here is interfacing. Whenever you're doing sweatshirts or clothing, you would use cutaway. For whatever reason, I don't have cutaway and I keep forgetting to buy cutaway. So I have this like mesh cutaway kind of. I believe it's supposed to be used for t-shirts. I did do my last applique sweatshirt using this fabric and I felt like it was a little bit wavy. But I thought, why not? I'm going to use it again because I just want to get practice doing the appliques. So this is my mighty hoop. I'm going to take the bottom of my mighty hoop and slide it into my sweatshirt. I probably should have tried to use my mighty hoop hoopster, but sometimes I feel like it makes it difficult to place it the way I be wanting to place it sometimes. So I thought I would just try flat on the table. So I kind of have the mark of where the letter starts and ends, and then I'm just trying to center that onto the frame. The top of the frame will snap on wherever I put the bottom on. So that's really my focus, is getting it straight, making sure the lines I drew are straight in the frame, making sure that it's relatively centered and that potentially the needle won't be too close to the edges and like break or something, because it's not a brother hoop, it's a mighty hoop. So this is what it looks like. This is my machine. I was using a smaller frame, so I had to open up this like the A frame of the embroidery machine so that I can tighten the screws up on it so that the larger frame could fit. So you just twist these little screws here and it will open up this arm so you can make it bigger or smaller. So I'm gonna hit the screen. It is a touch screen. I'm gonna hit it and then there's a button for USB, but you can't really see it on this picture because it's kind of faded out with the brightness. So once you decide, you will click the USB file, then you will go to wherever your file is saved on your USB drive, and then you will hit embroider. I always test out my embroidery, so I let it zoom around. But before I got there, I was looking at it, and that's when I noticed that the satin stitch was missing. It was just a zigzag stitch. There was no satin stitch. So I had to go back to my computer, and after you hit cut after zigzag, there's a button down there that says satin stitch. You gotta click that button. So I had to take it out of the embroidery machine, take it back to my computer, and then make sure I save the file the correct way. So I'm saving the A and the Y with the updated stitch, and then I am moving back to the machine. So it's a little bit clearer here, so you can kind of see what buttons I'm pushing, the USB button, the A file, and I'm gonna hit embroider. I'm gonna hit the little test button, and you will see the hoop will move around, and as you can see, it's moving over very far, very close to the frame, and you don't want that. So I'm going to go back. You can resize on the machine, so you can take it down quite a bit, depending on what size the file was when you inserted it into the machine. So I found a size that I thought would work with this size frame, and then I tested it out. And then I went ahead and started the first step of the applique, which is just like a running stitch. And then you go to a zigzag stitch. And then once you cut out your fabric, then you would put a satin stitch on top to keep them all together. You will see me here changing my thread because I decided I wanted white and not black. So I'm going to change my thread, then I'm going to be perfectly ready to start 100%. This machine does have a automatic threader, but I did something to it and it doesn't automatically thread anymore. So this is me threading the machine, and then you have to hit the lock button, and you see that green blinking arrow. You just hit it and it will start stitching. So this is the A. And I'm not going to bore you trying to talk over all of the stitching in this video. So I have some music that will play. Then I'll pop back on once I get to the next step. But here you will see I stitched my A, and then I have my fabric cut out in one piece. I'm going to lay the fabric on top so that it can stitch out the zigzag. So now I've taken my hoop off and I'm back at my table. I'm going to make a slit with my big scissors, and I have these little curved, double curved embroidery scissors. I'm going to use this to cut very, very close to the edge of my stitches here. I've done this twice before now. This is my third applique, and I realized, hindsight, that my satin stitch, I did not adjust the width when I did this, so I still ended up with like some little frayed edges. But if your satin stitch is wide enough, this isn't an issue. So if you do have a narrow or satin stitch, you want to make sure you get the fabric cut like as close to the stitch as possible. I've seen other people do like what do you call that, the Cricut stuff, where they cut out the fabric with the machine. I don't have a Cricut, so I just have to cut it with the scissors. The first two times I did this, it was fine. This time I realized it was still a little frayed, and I should have made my stitch width a little bit wider to make sure that it's going to cover up that 1/8 of an inch, 1/16 of an inch of fabric that's kind of sticking out the sides of the zigzag stitch. So this is the satin stitch that's happening right now. It does take a little bit longer because it's a lot more stitches. One thing I will say, as I already mentioned before, check your stitch width and check your stitch density. I wish it was a little bit thicker and I wish it was a little bit wider, but I didn't want to change it at this point because I still have 2 more letters to do, and I didn't want them to be different, and I didn't want to do this one over. So each letter will have 3 sets of stitches. It has that first stitch, which is the placement stitch. The second stitch is when you place your contrast fabric down, and then it does a zigzag stitch on top. Then you cut around your zigzag stitch, put it back on your machine, and then you're going to do your satin stitch. Those are the 3 steps that you have to do for each letter that you applique. If you choose to do it in this manner where I'm doing 1 letter at a time, if you know your applique fit in 1 frame, it would potentially do all of the placement stitch and then all of the zigzag, and then at the end all of the satin stitch. So now that this is kind of wrapping up, we're going to move on to the next letter, which caused me so many issues. But first, here is a close-up. This is what I meant when I said that the fabric was still sticking out. There were some frays. So you can imagine if this satin stitch was just a little bit wider, it would have caught those extra threads in there. I'm going to take my scissors and try to cut as close as possible, but I'm not that concerned because this sweater is for me. Now we're going to move on to the Y. So now my biggest concern here is I have marked where my center of my sweatshirt is. I want that center to be the center of my Y, so I need to get my frame lined up just right, and it took me a long time. It took me a real long time to get this placement right, and I don't know if this would have been easier if I'd used my hooping station, but I did not choose to. So my goal is to get that little mark in the center to be as close to the mark, the center like knob right there on the mighty hoop, and then making sure that it's tight and that the interfacing is secured inside of there. Another hindsight would be I would stop and trim the interfacing on the previous letter before I did this. I didn't trim any of the interfacing or interlining until the end, which some of it was kind of caught together in the different letters, but it's fine. So here it is. I put my Y on, I put my hoop on for the Y, and I was looking at, there's a little red dot on the machine. I don't know if you can see it from this point. There's a laser, and I'm trying to make sure that the top of the Y and the bottom of the Y is aligned with the A that's already here. And for some reason, it was just coming up short, and I couldn't quite figure it out. So I ended up taking it off a little bit, trying to make some extra marks to get it lined up. I did tell you guys I had to resize my first letter, the A, because it was a little bit too close to the frame. So I tried resizing this. I didn't capture what the size of the previous one was, so I had to kind of go back and backtrack. But here you'll see I'm like, okay, I'm just going to do the placement stitch and see how it works. And you see the bottom of the Y does not match where the bottom of the A is. It's a little bit short. So I took out those stitches. Thankfully, they were very easy to take out because it was just placement stitches, nothing crazy. And I thought if the top of the Y stays the same, then I don't have to take out all of these stitches. Well, wrong. I eventually took them all out, but I wanted to see if I could get the placement right. And it took a little while, and I finally got it together where I didn't have to take out too many stitches. So once I got it together, I'm going to go ahead and place my fabric on top to do my zigzag stitch. And then I'm going to go into trimming like I did for the other style. So I took off my frame once this was finished, and I realized I had stitched the back of my sweatshirt to the front of my sweatshirt. How did that happen? I have no idea. I don't know what I was doing. So I had to take all of those stitches out and then go back and do it again. So this is the remainder of the Y. Please don't do that. Make sure that you are checking the bottom of your embroidery machine to make sure that your sweatshirt is not caught up. So moving on to the next letter, which is another A, I'm going to draw a placement line to make sure that the A is lined up with the other A and the Y. So that's what you see me drawing here. So I know kind of where to place my hoop. The hoop should be a little bit above and a little bit below the lines that I drew on my sweatshirt. So that way that there's enough room for the needle and needle bar to stitch on that line at the top and on that line at the bottom. So it was a little bit of placement, like shifting around, making sure the stabilizer is in place. And I was just like, I'm not sure. So I checked it out a little bit, finally got it together, put it on the machine, made sure the bottom of my sweatshirt is on the bottom, not above the single arm. And now we're going to re-stitch the A following the same steps from the first A and the Y. But always, you know, you gotta map it out and make sure that the placement is hitting where you need it to. Alright, I am finally done embroidering. It is pretty level. I'm pretty excited about how well it ended up being lined up. That is always my biggest concern when I'm doing these type of sweatshirts. I'm going through with my scissors, trying to get off some of these extra fray parts. This will be a big reminder to me to make sure that my satin stitch is a little bit wider. I had some extra stitches in here from when I was trying to get that Y placement correct. So I'm just going in with my seam ripper and tweezers. And actually tweezers ended up being a lot easier. Just to pull off that little extra row of stitching that was poking out when I was trying to get that placement correct. But pulled them all out and it was starting to look a lot better. Just a little bit of cleanup to make it look cleaner. And then once I did that, I moved back in with the scissors. And then I got my lint roller, hoping that it would help get some of these extra like threads off of everywhere, especially the back where I had to take the Y that stitched into the back of the sweatshirt. So I did end up taking the tweezers to pull out some of those. This here is the inside of the sweatshirt, and I was telling you guys, like, I wish I would have trimmed after each letter because some of them got like caught into the next letter, which is fine. It's just more reinforcement, but I wish I would have just trimmed during the process. So that is another note. But outside of that, the sweatshirt is done. Like, I just, you know, want to clean it up, get rid of some of the extra threads, but it turned out super cute, exactly what I wanted it to be. I'm super excited and I can't wait to do another project. But until next time, y'all, bye.